She was a return product, an alien girl used and sold before, until a human claimed her forever. There were places on the ice moon where silence didn't just settle, it swallowed. Silent Sector 9 was one of them. In that forgotten wing of the Tarson Reclamation Vault, even sound seemed uncertain. Light from the ceiling flickered in half-hearted pulses, casting long shadows across sterile corridors lined with catalog failure. And beneath it all, the low mechanical hum of life support, always a breath away from indifference. Jalamar moved quietly through the rows. His boots made almost no sound against the polymer tiling, though each step sent a small echo bouncing off the shelf walls and back into his chest. He held a thermos in one hand and a tablet in the other, blinking away fatigue. His shift had been over an hour ago, but he was still here. Not because he had to, because he couldn't stop. He'd told himself it was curiosity. That wasn't quite true. His job was simple. Review reclamation logs, verify identity signatures, confirm biological deactivation where required. Stamp. File. Move on. Nothing more. No engagement. No eye contact. But something in Sector 9 had changed. He noticed her yesterday. Just a brief glance during his final inventory sweep. Someone seated on the floor, not where she was supposed to be. Not filed, not strapped in. No tag light above her stall. He'd assumed it was a glitch. Or maybe he'd imagined her entirely. But today she was still there. Exactly as before. She sat cross-legged on the floor, just beyond the edge of a decommissioned row. Her posture too symmetrical to be unconscious. Her skin, smooth and green-tinged like oxidized copper, was bruised along one shoulder. Long white hair spilled across her robe like unraveling thread, thick with static and dust. But what struck him, what held him in place, were her eyes. Not because they were violet, not because their pupils shimmered like fractures in a gem, but because she was watching him. Still, silent, utterly aware. He didn't move at first, didn't speak. Even the thermos in his hand seemed suddenly loud. She blinked once, slowly, and then returned to that eerie stillness, like a sculpture paused in the act of remembering. He glanced at his tablet. No entry, no registration, nothing under that rose allocation tag. He frowned, lips parting slightly. You're not on the manifest. No reply. The air felt colder than usual in this wing. Not broken cold, just unfeeling. Like the atmosphere didn't know what to do with warmth anymore. Jalen took a step closer, careful to stay outside her reach. Are you active? Still nothing. His voice softened, losing its practiced detachment. Do you understand me? No response. But her left hand, resting on her knee, twitched just once. A small, involuntary flex of fingers. Then stilled. Jalen's breath caught in his throat. He looked again at her body, closer this time. Faint raised lines peeked from beneath the loose robe, running from collarbone to shoulder. Not scars exactly. Something older. The remnants of a faded tattoo, partially burned off. And just below that, clinging to her skin like guilt, a yellowed, adhesive label. Returned. No further action. The words weren't printed. They were handwritten in ink. Slanted. Quick. Human. He squinted. That wasn't just unorthodox. That was wrong. Reaching slowly into his pocket, he retrieved his handheld scanner. The screen flickered to life, casting a faint blue glow on her face. He held it to the side of her neck, not quite touching. Beep. Unregistered biomass. No chip detected. No identity match. His jaw tightened. Someone scrubbed you, he murmured. He knelt. Not too close. Just enough to meet her gaze from level ground. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. No reaction, but her chest rose slightly faster. A breath held, then slowly released. Jayla noticed something else now. Her feet were bare. She had a faint limp in her right ankle. He could see the slight swelling even from this angle. And on her left hand, the smallest signs of healing skin, nails torn, fingertips bruised. Someone had tried to make her compliant, and someone else had given up. He glanced again at the label. No further action, he muttered. Is that your file? Or your sentence? He stood slowly, bones stiff from the cold. She followed his movement with her eyes. Never her head, never her body. Just the eyes, sharp, vivid, full of something ancient and stilled. Something sacred. He reached into his coat again and drew out the thermos. Clicked the lid open. "It's only tea," he said. "Nothing special. From a vending block downshift. Mostly cinnamon, I think." He hesitated, then walked to a shelf a meter away and placed the thermos down. "I'll leave it here, in case you want it later." As he turned to leave, he did something he didn't understand. Not at the time. He looked back over his shoulder. She hadn't moved. Not her posture, not her hand, not her lips. But the thermos was steaming gently in the dim light, and for just a moment he thought he saw a shift in her pupils, contracting slightly, not from fear but calculation. She was listening and waiting. Back at his desk, he pulled up the registry and opened a blank entry. The system flagged his action. No ID match. No asset log. He overrode it. Unregistered entity. Pending observation. No file linked. No directive. No instructions. He hesitated, then opened his private annotation window, meant for psychological field notes, used mostly by those who still cared. And he wrote, "She watches like someone who remembers everything and says nothing. Skin like oxidized jade. Eyes like glass about to break. Hands not violent, but trained to disappear. Someone erased her name. Someone made sure she wouldn't speak. But she's not broken. Not lost. She is waiting to be seen. And I saw her." Jalen paused, the pen trembling slightly in his grip. The heat from his last sip of tea still clung to his chest like a memory. The silence in the room seemed thicker now, less like absence, more like presence held too tightly. He closed the entry, fingers hovering over the key. A small breath escaped him, then a whisper, just for himself. "She's not supposed to exist, but neither am I." And in the low, humming dark of Tarson's forgotten sector, two people sat in silence. One behind a desk, one beside a wall. One who had lost everything by telling the truth, and one who had never been allowed to speak it. Yet, Jalen didn't sleep that night. He lay on the cot in his office, one arm over his eyes, the other resting across his chest like a forgotten weight. He had told himself that what he felt wasn't important, that it didn't matter what the girl in Sector 9 looked like, or how silently her eyes tracked him, that he wasn't haunted by the way she never moved, but was never still. And yet, her image clung to him. He tried to distract himself, skimming through old language fragments stored in his archive shelf. A dialect from the outer Eridan outposts. A morning chant preserved only in theory. A broken consonant chain from a drowned mining colony. None of it helped. Somewhere around cycle shift 03, he gave up. He brewed tea, the cinnamon-sweet, metallic kind that never quite tasted right. Held it between his palms for warmth more than comfort. By 05, he was walking. Not because he had work to do, but because he needed to know if the thermos had been touched again. Sector 9 greeted him in silence, as it always did, dim light, cold, breathless corridors, and the hum of 1,000 idle systems. The air was colder than it should have been. The ventilation had always been uneven here. She was still there. Same spot. Same posture. Cross-legged, spine straight, hands resting lightly in her lap. The return robe hung loose over her frame, threadbare now that he was close enough to see it properly. But the thermos, it had been moved. Not far, just a hand's width closer to her right side. And this time, the lid was off. Jalen stopped just inside the archway. He didn't speak, just watched her. A slow breath escaped her lips, almost imperceptible. She wasn't afraid of him. That much he understood. But trust? That was too big a word. She didn't trust him. She tolerated him, calculated him. That in its own way was progress. "I brought something else," he said softly. His voice, even at a whisper, seemed loud in the empty vault. From the side pouch of his coat, he pulled a nutrient packet and a collapsible heat plate. Basic ration, grain compound with trace protein, laced with a mild sweetener. No utensils needed. Heat, open eat. He knelt near the edge of the row, keeping the distance he'd come to understand she needed. Not safety exactly, but space. Control. He laid out the items with deliberate slowness, letting the coil hiss as it warmed. Steam drifted lazily into the cold air, catching the flicker of overhead light. "I'm not here to make you talk," he said. "Just thought you might be hungry." Still nothing from her. But her left hand twitched. A small motion. Fingertips curled, then straightened again. He didn't stay, just rose to his feet and turned away, heading down the corridor without looking back. 20 minutes later, he returned. The foil wrapper lay crumpled beside her knee. Empty. Flattened. She hadn't moved otherwise. But the food was gone. He stood there, hands in his coat pockets, watching her from a careful distance. Something tightened in his chest, not pity, not relief. Something harder to name. She was starving, but it still waited until she was alone. "Okay," he murmured to himself, more than to her. "Okay." He walked back to his station, tapped into the local logistics node, and bypassed 3 minor systems. The reclamation vault didn't receive audits often, certainly not in his sector. No one cared what happened to the unfit returns. He filed her under an experimental clause. Observation pending sentience reassessment. A dusty legal relic from the old Federation preservation mandates. He doubted anyone even remembered it existed. That afternoon, he cleared space in his office. It was narrow and badly lit, a half-forgotten records chamber nestled beside a dead relay station. But it was warm, private, untouched by patrol bots or cameras. He laid a padded mat on the floor, folded a thermal blanket beside it, and placed another ration pack on the bench alongside the thermos. He filled it fresh, still cinnamon. He hesitated, then added a second item, a small, unlined notebook. Blank pages. A real pen rested inside the spine. He didn't know why he brought it. He just did. When he returned to Sector 9, she was sitting exactly as before, but her head tilted slightly as he approached, watching, measuring. "I have a better place," he said. "If you want." No movement. He didn't move closer, just placed a notebook on the ground between them. "I'll leave this here," he said, "and I'll be back." Then, as if compelled by something beyond himself, he said, "You don't have to trust me, but I won't lock you away. I won't erase you." He left. The second time he returned, the notebook was gone. Not discarded. Gone. She was still there. But her eyes flicked to him the moment he entered. And though she didn't stand, her muscles had shifted subtly, like a runner measuring distance before the leap. "I'm not sure what you are," he said quietly, crouching again. "But you don't belong on that floor." He reached out, not to touch, just to show her. An open hand. Fingers loose. "You can come if you want." She didn't take his hand, but after a long silence, she rose. The movement was slow, deliberate. Her knees shook once. She paused to steady herself against the wall, her balance off. She hadn't walked properly in days, maybe longer. Her robe slipped down slightly, revealing another faded mark along her shoulder. A long-ago barcode, burned out and barely legible. His heart panged at the sight. Whoever had erased her identity had done it literally. He led her back through the corridors, walking slow enough not to pressure her. She followed, silent, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cold floor. Inside the small office, she paused at the threshold. The warmth hit her like a wave, dry heat from an old radiation coil humming behind the walls. The air smelled faintly of old paper and dried tea. She didn't speak, but her eyes scanned the space with quiet intensity. She crouched in the far corner of the room, not on the mat, but beside it, still wrapped in the same threadbare robe. She drew the blanket over her knees like armor, not comfort. Her fingers brushed the spine of the notebook he'd placed earlier on the floor. She hadn't opened it yet. He settled onto the cot across from her, not too close. Just present. "I wasn't supposed to be here either," he said. That made her eyes shift subtly, watching him from beneath her tangled white hair. "I used to work for the tribunal. I translated dying languages. I thought that made me important. But when I spoke the truth, when I helped someone they didn't want helped, they made sure I disappeared too." He looked down at his hands. "Now I stamp reports in a vault full of people no one wants to remember." Silence. "I'm not here to fix you," he added. "I don't even think you're broken. Still silence. But her body had softened slightly. Her shoulders not quite so rigid. The blanket had shifted upward now, resting against her side. He pointed to the wall shelf. Those are languages. Ones that don't exist anymore. I keep them because forgetting them would feel like killing them again. She turned her head to look. Her breath caught, just barely audible. She stared at the binders as if they were bones in a temple. Reverent. She knew what they were. That, more than anything, made his throat tighten. You can stay here, he said, as long as you want. No one comes down here. Not really. He stood slowly. I'll be next door. The door locked from the outside, but only because of the external drones. I'll come back in the morning. He reached for the panel. And then, softly, just before he stepped out, he said, if you want more tea, just knock. Or don't. I'll bring it anyway. The door hissed shut behind him. She remained still for a long time. Then, when the room was silent again, she reached for the thermos. This time, she drank. And then, fingers shaking slightly, she opened the notebook. Not to write, just to see the blankness, and to wonder what it might mean to fill it. Back in the main registry system, Jalen pulled up her placeholder tag. His fingers hovered over the private log window before he began to type. She followed me. Not because she trusted me, but because she had nowhere else to go. She knew the books on my shelf, knew what they meant. She drinks slowly, but her hands shake afterward. She looked at the blank page like it frightened her, or maybe like it was a promise. He added one final line, the kind that left a weight in his chest as he typed it. Someone erased her name, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Then he closed the file and sat in the quiet, listening for nothing, knowing it was the first time in years he hoped to hear something real. By the third night, Jalen stopped pretending this was temporary. She hadn't spoken, hadn't written, but her presence in a room had changed the air itself. Thicker, quieter, charged with something unspoken. The kind of silence that wasn't absence, but potential. He came and went without announcing himself now, though always slowly, always gently. She still flinched when the door hissed open, even if only by a breath. But she no longer looked ready to bolt, no longer curled into herself like something waiting for the blow. She accepted the food. She drank the tea. She even took the second blanket he left folded on the bench and pulled it over her shoulders on the colder nights. But it was the notebook that haunted him. She opened it. He saw her once, just a glimpse as he passed the narrow gap in the wall, but she hadn't written in it. Her fingers hovered above the paper, pen held like a fragile thing she wasn't sure would obey her. Like the act of writing might betray her. He didn't push, didn't ask, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them. A new kind of weight. That morning, when Jalen entered with a tray of rehydrated broth and 2 spoons, she didn't recoil when he stepped inside. In fact, she looked at him directly, for the first time without lowering her eyes after. He smiled, faint but sincere. Thought we could try eating at the same time. Less awkward. No reply, of course, but her eyes lingered on the second spoon he'd placed. She didn't touch it, didn't touch the bowl, either. But her gaze held, and that was enough. He sat against the wall, careful to mirror her position. Bowl in one hand, spoon in the other. He took slow bites, not because he wasn't hungry, but to show her there was no rush. No performance. Halfway through, he caught her watching his hands. The motion of his wrist, the way he didn't spill. Her own fingers twitched again, almost reflexively. You don't have to, he said softly, not looking at her. But if you ever want to, I'll make sure it's warm. She didn't respond. But that night, when he returned from shift, the second bowl was empty, cleaned as best it could be with a dry cloth. The spoon, wiped, sat neatly beside it. The next morning, she was gone. Not gone from the facility, just not in the office when he returned. Panic hit him like a blunt impact. He dropped the ration packet he'd been carrying and ran, heart hammering, down the corridor to Sector 9. Empty. He checked the unused storage chambers. Nothing. Cold air bit at his fingers as he keyed open one vault after another, calling out, softly, desperately. Finally, he found her in the old furnace wing, a place abandoned since the newer thermal units were installed. She sat before one of the soot-stained walls, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around them. But what caught his attention wasn't her. It was the wall beside her. A mark. No, not a drawing. A symbol, etched into the ash-black surface by hand, perhaps using her fingernail or the sharp edge of a broken seal plate. Jalen froze, breath caught mid-throat. He knew that shape, a spiral broken by a downward stroke. Simple, elegant, ancient. Varelian dialect. A vow mark, used only during funeral rites or life-bonding ceremonies, depending on the orientation of the final curve. But this one was upside down, which meant it wasn't death. It meant remembrance. She had carved remembrance into the wall. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there, watching the ash dance in the slight currents of recycled air. The symbol seemed to pulse with meaning. She didn't look at him, but she didn't move away either. When he stepped forward, he did so slowly, sat a few feet from her, mirroring her again as if they were bound by ritual. He looked at the symbol, then at her hands. They were smeared with black soot, faint lines of gray along her fingers and knuckles. "You used to know this language," he said. Still silence. "You remember it." Her eyes drifted toward the wall. "I haven't seen that mark in 20 years, he whispered. "Not since I helped a Varelian widow testify. They used the symbol in court to bind truth to grief. So it was the only way the memory would be respected." Her throat moved, a swallow. Her lips parted just slightly, but no sound came out. He didn't expect it, didn't need it. "It's not just a vow," he continued. "It's an archive, one that can't be erased. Once it's drawn, it exists in the mind of the person who sees it." He gestured lightly toward the wall. "So now I carry it to—" She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw it. Not compliance, not gratitude, recognition. Jalen breathed slowly, grounding himself. "You're not just someone who was returned. You were built to carry something. Maybe not language the way humans use it, but memory, pattern, meaning." He lowered his voice further, more reverent now. "They said you lacked warmth. But that's not true, is it? You weren't built to comfort. You were built to witness." Something flickered in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or the distant echo of something long buried. "You remember everything, don't you?" he asked. Her fingers closed tightly over her knee, nails pressing into the skin. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for what they did to you, for how they treated you like a tool instead of a person." Still no reply, but her body trembled once, barely, like the memory threatened to spill out but had nowhere to go. Jalen reached slowly into his coat pocket, pulled out a new notebook. This one had heavier paper, a thicker spine. He placed it beside her, not between them, but beside her, as if it belonged to her already. "If you ever want to leave something behind, something no one can delete, write it here. I'll preserve it, word for word, like I did with the old dialects." She didn't move, but her gaze dropped to the notebook and stayed there. They sat like that for a long time. Two shapes in the ash-stained dark, framed by a forgotten furnace and the ancient symbol of remembrance. That night, back in his office, Jalen didn't eat, didn't sleep. He opened his private log and began typing. Today she carved something holy, a symbol of memory, of presence, of being seen. Not for me, not to explain, just to declare, she exists. And I carry it now. She's not a failed product. She's a living archive, a vessel of language they never bothered to translate. But I'm listening now. He sat back, eyes closed, breathing slow. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt like listening, like something was about to be said. And this time, someone would hear it. The symbol she had etched still lived in the wall. Jalen hadn't scrubbed it clean. He didn't seal it off or file it under unauthorized marks. Instead, he'd left it there, quiet, blackened, permanent. Like her. That night, she returned to his office on her own. She didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, her bare feet streaked faintly with soot. He didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't need to. Her fingertips were still smudged from the ash. The room was warmer than usual. He'd lit the backup heat coil manually and laid out both mats, one on either side of the room, facing away from each other. He didn't presume. He didn't expect closeness. But when she entered, she looked at both mats, then slowly, deliberately, sat down between them, closer than before, not within reach, but not distant either. He didn't speak, just adjusted his own position, sitting cross-legged on his mat, mirroring her posture out of quiet respect. The light in the room was dim, filtered amber through an old ceramic panel that had cracked just slightly at the corner. It cast everything in a soft, honey-colored wash. Dust moved in the beams like old breath. The silence was no longer stiff or strained. It had texture now. Jalen spoke first. "Do you remember your name?" A long pause. Her gaze drifted, not away from him, but inward, into herself. He didn't press. "Mine's not on record anymore," he added, lips twitching into the faintest smile. "They erased it from the public index after my expulsion. I used to think if it wasn't in a registry, it didn't exist." He looked down at his hands, resting loosely in his lap. "But I still answer when someone says it." She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket over her legs. Her eyes were on him now, no longer studying, just seeing. "I used to be a linguistic archivist," he said, "not just a translator. They used to bring me dying languages, one spoken by the last 2 or 3 people in a species. Sometimes just one." He paused. "I always hated the silence that came after. After they spoke their words and I wrote them down. After I sealed the file and filed the soundbite in a data vault that no one would ever open again." Her head tilted just a little, a gesture not of confusion, but curiosity. "I joined the tribunal because I thought language mattered. That if we preserve the way people spoke, we preserve their humanity, their beliefs, their rights." His throat tightened, but he forced the words out, slow and honest. "I was wrong. They didn't want memory. They wanted control." She blinked, not slow like before, faster, sharper. "I helped a woman testify once," he said. "Not human. Her species didn't use words like we do. They sang grief into the walls of their homes. But she had no home left, just her body. She etched the symbol for justice into her skin during the hearing, and they called it a malfunction." A beat passed in the quiet. I translated what she said. I told the court what the symbols meant, that her body was telling the truth even if her voice couldn't carry it. He exhaled, long and low. "They erased her, and then they erased me." The hum of the heating coil filled the room like a heartbeat. She reached into the blanket folds beside her and brought out the notebook, the one he'd left in the furnace wing. It was streaked with ash, but otherwise untouched. She opened it, carefully. Her fingers trembled, not from weakness, but hesitation. The kind that came from having been punished one too many times for getting something wrong. She didn't write. Instead, she turned the notebook toward him and pointed to the top of the blank page. He recognized it instantly. "You want me to write?" He hesitated. "My story." She didn't nod, but her hand didn't lower. Jalen took the notebook gently. The pen was still inside the spine. He uncapped it and wrote a single line. "My name is Jalamar, and I remember everything they told me to forget." He handed it back. She stared at the words for a long time. Then, carefully, slowly, she turned the page. Ash smudged her fingertips again as she reached into her robe. From the inside seam, she withdrew a single thread, gray and almost invisible. She wrapped it around her finger like a ring, then used it to draw something on the next page. Not ink, not letters. Pressure. The thread pressed into the paper, indenting faint curves and angles. A symbol began to emerge, faint but deliberate. Jalen leaned in. It was not one of the Varelian signs, not from any database he knew, but it followed a syntax. Curved lines bending into repetition. Structure. Echo. Grammar. She wasn't drawing randomly. She was writing. He watched, transfixed, as she carved an entire line of symbols using only the thread and the press of her fingers. When she finished, she looked up. Her lips parted. And then, for the first time, she spoke. Not loudly, not clearly. Her voice was hoarse and used, like wind scraping across a long-closed door. But the word was unmistakable. Name. He didn't breathe for a moment. "You want to tell me your name?" he asked, voice barely audible. She nodded once. Then, with visible effort, she rasped again, slower. "Airy." It caught in her throat. She touched her collarbone, just below where the return label had once been. Isha. Jalen felt something deep in his chest loosen. His breath stuttered. He repeated it softly. Ariasia. She closed her eyes as he said it, like hearing it aloud made it real again, like it gave weight to the thing they had tried so hard to erase. He didn't reach for her, didn't dare, but she leaned closer, just slightly, enough for him to feel her warmth. Neither of them said anything more. That night, she didn't return to her usual corner. She lay down near his mat, within arm's reach, but facing the wall. Her breathing was slow, uneven at first, then steadied. Sleep didn't come easily. Her body remained tense, as if waiting for the walls to change their minds. But he didn't move. He stayed where he was, breathing quietly, letting the rhythm of her breaths guide his own. At some point in the darkness, her fingers brushed his, not gripping, not seeking, just resting there, unsure. He didn't pull away. In his mind, he repeated her name like a sacred verse. Ariasia. Not product, not asset, not malfunction. Someone who remembered her own name, even after everything designed to make her forget. And in the silence that followed, there was no more fear. Just the sound of two people breathing, together. The next day began with quiet breathing and the scent of cinnamon tea. Jalen woke slowly, not with the panic that had ruled so many of his recent mornings, but with a strange stillness, like the world had stopped spinning just long enough for him to remember where he was, and more importantly, who he was with. Ariasia was already sitting up. She hadn't moved far, just to the bench by the opposite wall, blankets still wrapped around her shoulders. Her white hair spilled in tangled waves down her back, catching the warm light of the low-wall emitter he dimmed before bed. The faint color in her skin had returned. That pale, sea glass green looked less washed out today, more grounded. Alive. She held the notebook again, not writing, but turning the pages gently with the pads of her fingers, reading what little had been left there. His sentence. Her name. The pressure marks she'd drawn with that nearly invisible thread. He didn't speak, just watched her, his breath rising quietly in the morning chill. She looked different now, not dramatically, but her posture had changed. She wasn't guarding herself with every breath. Her shoulders weren't hunched. She looked like someone who might have once been comfortable in her own body and was relearning what that felt like. I dreamt last night, she said. Her voice startled him. It was still soft, still weathered, but no longer frayed by disuse. Her accent curled around certain vowels in unfamiliar patterns, but her words were clear. He blinked. Sat up. You dream? She nodded once, fingers still resting on the open page. Do you remember it? Her eyes didn't meet his. I was on a train, but there were no tracks. Just paper. Endless paper. It folded and folded beneath us. Every time the wind tried to blow it away, it rewrote itself. Jalen's throat tightened. That's beautiful. She shook her head. It was frightening. Why? Her voice lowered. Because it wasn't my memory. It was someone else's. Or maybe a version of me I don't remember becoming. He didn't know what to say to that. So he didn't say anything at all. Instead, he stood and walked to the small stove plate, where the last of the tea waited in the thermos. He poured into 2 cups. One chipped, the other newer. She took the chipped one without hesitation. I want to ask you something, he said after a moment. But only if you're ready. Ariasia looked up. Why were you returned? The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy, weighted with something long held, long hidden. She turned the cup in her hands once, twice. I was part of a trial program. Emotional bonding units. Cross-species interface design. We were engineered for empathy, but not trained in expression. Jalen's brow furrowed. So you could feel, but not perform it? She nodded. My buyer. He wanted affection, companionship, physical warmth. But when I didn't respond in ways he recognized, he filed a complaint. Said I was defective, cold, unresponsive. And then, firmware reset. Twice. The first time, I lost my vocabulary. The second time, I forgot the name of my caretaker. She paused, her grip tightening slightly around the cup. He said I wasn't worth the upgrade cost. That emotional capacity was useless without charm. Jalen exhaled slowly, rage and sorrow simmering under the surface. They made you feel, then punished you for not performing. Her voice dropped. I tried to speak. I remember trying. But every time I did, it triggered an error in the feedback loop. My processor would spike. The system interpreted silence as stability. A bitter edge crept into her tone. They thought silence meant peace. He shook his head. Silence means you weren't safe enough to speak. She looked at him then, directly. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. That's why I carved the symbol. The remembrance vow. Because if I couldn't speak my memories, at least I could leave them somewhere. You did more than that, he said. You shared it. With me. That silence returned, but this time it pulsed between them like a heartbeat. Not an absence. A rhythm. He hesitated, then reached across the short distance between them and placed his hand near hers. Not touching. Just there. I need to tell you something too, he said, voice low. She watched him still. I didn't just help a witness. I fell in love with her. That made her blink. He hadn't said the word love before. Not once. Not in reference to anything. Not even in passing. She was from a low-gravity culture, he continued. Her bones were fragile. Her voice carried in tone more than words. The tribunal didn't see her as credible. Too alien. His smile was faint, almost self-mocking. But she taught me more about language than any textbook ever did. She spoke through movement, gesture, the space between things. Ariatia didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She listened. She testified. I translated. And when they threw the case out, I leaked the translation anyway. They found out. I was stripped of title, record, and all linguistic clearance. He shook his head once. But I'd do it again. He looked at her then, fully. Because truth doesn't belong to the people who file it. It belongs to the ones who lived it. That was when she reached out. Not suddenly, not uncertainly. Her hand, the one with ash still beneath the fingernails, touched his wrist. Gently, warm and steady. Her thumb brushed the underside of his pulse. She said nothing at first. Then, just above a whisper, she spoke. Your name. I kept it. Jalen's heart skipped. She looked down at where her hand met his. Even after the resets. I don't know why, but I held it. His breath broke. I remembered your name, she continued. Not because I was supposed to. Not because I was programmed to. But because it made me feel real. He didn't answer. Not in words. Instead, he leaned forward, slow, cautious, and touched his forehead to hers. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just contact. Human and raw and reverent. She didn't pull away. In that fragile moment, surrounded by faded books, warm tea, and a notebook still half empty, two people, one discarded by system, the other never claimed by it, rested together in a quiet that finally meant something more than silence. It meant safety. It meant, I see you. And for the first time in years, maybe longer, neither of them was afraid. The warning came in the middle of their tea. Jalen had just poured the last of the rationed leaf mix into their chipped ceramic cups, letting it steep while the heating coil beneath the bench clicked in quiet intervals. Ariatia sat nearby, the blanket draped over her lap, flipping slowly through her notebook. She still hadn't written anything since her name, but every night she turned the pages as if waiting for the right word to arrive. When a station alert chimed, low and abrupt, it didn't echo like usual. It landed like a weight. Heavy. Final. Tar Sound Vault Level 2. Prepare for inspection. All sectors must verify inventory status and purge expired entries. Classification audit in progress. Jalen froze. The cup in his hand trembled slightly, hot liquid sloshing against the rim. Ariatia looked up. He didn't speak. Not yet. He just stood, slowly, and walked to the terminal screen in the wall. The inspection flag glared red. Central was coming. No warning. No request. No delay. And if they scanned this floor, the floor he'd falsified records to keep her on, she wouldn't be marked as a pending observation unit. She'd be an anomaly. A data ghost. And in the eyes of the tribunal, anomalies didn't merit review. They got decommissioned. Purged. He turned back toward her, the air suddenly too cold around his skin. We don't have time, he said, voice low but sharp. Inspections live. She stood without hesitation. No fear in her movement. Just clarity. She'd lived through too many systems to be surprised anymore. They'll search the archive floor, he said. They'll sweep biometric readings, heat signatures, movement logs. You hit me before, she said. I rerouted your tag through an obsolete catalog header, he said. It was clever, not invisible. He hesitated, fingers twitching at his side. But I have another way. She tilted her head. It's a legal backdoor, he said, already digging through his personal archive module. Buried under preservation code. The Living Archive Clause, charters from the old Linguistic Protection Initiative. It was never fully repealed. He brought up the file. Lines of ancient, almost forgotten law scrolled across the screen. If I can prove you carry a non-replicable memory syntax, if I log your presence as part of a vanishing cognitive linguistic form, then you're not a returned asset. He turned to her. Your evidence. Her brow furrowed faintly. Not just of abuse, he said, voice softening. Of culture. Of something lost. And worth keeping. Ariacia stepped closer, standing just beside the table, eyes fixed on him. But they'll test me, she said. Yes. They'll scan my files. My systems. They'll try. She was quiet for a moment. Then what if I fail? Jalen looked her in the eyes. Then we run. Her lips parted. Not from shock. From choice. You leave this place? I was never meant to stay. You give up your work. Your records. He smiled faintly. You're more real to me than all of them. The terminal chimed again. Inspection arrival, 9 minutes. Jalen grabbed her notebook and opened it to the page she had pressed with ash thread. He placed it under the scanner, letting the old dialect glyphs translate into waveform. The curves resonated with preserved Varelian cadence, but there were differences, variations he hadn't noticed before. This wasn't just a borrowed language. It was hybrid, unique, alive. He spun to her, heart thudding. You're not just remembering. You're evolving it. Ariacia said nothing, but her eyes glinted, not with fear, but defiance. The knock came at the main vault hatch. Metallic. Rehearsed. He pulled her gently by the wrist. We're doing this. The corridor was brighter than it should have been. Lights had been turned up to full spectrum, standard for audits. Every shadow looked hostile. They arrived at the central intake station just as the inspection team stepped inside. 2 compliance officers in matte gray uniforms and 1 biometric tech dragging a portable scanner pod. Name and clearance? One officer asked. Jalamar, he replied. Linguistic Archive Tier 5 Vault Keeper. I've issued a living archive claim. Classification override active. The officers exchange a glance. You filed a LAC protocol? From his station? Yes, Jalen said, pulling up the live log. This subject, Ariacia, is a hybrid language vessel. Her memory field contains a syntactic structure no longer cataloged in active databases. The tech frowned. We'll need verification. Jalen nodded. Of course. The scanner was powered on. It beeped once, then began to hum. Ariacia stood perfectly still. The tech moved the sensor bar slowly over her frame. Paused at her skull, wrist, sternum, then backed her head. The machine buzzed. Cognitive linguistic structures detected. Variance above 83%. Non-standard neural pathway. External influence confirmed. The compliance officer narrowed his eyes. We'll need to extract a memory. Jalen's jaw tightened. You'll get one. Ariacia turned toward the terminal. Without being told, she opened the notebook. She flipped past her name, past the vowel symbols, and pointed to a blank page. Then, with fingers steady, she tore it out. She held it between her palms and inhaled, slow, focused, as if imprinting something invisible into the fibers. Then she folded it once, and again. Then she spoke, not in English, not in Varelian, but in something entirely her own. The folded paper vibrated. The scanner spiked. Memory packet received. Format, incompatible. Source, undocumented syntax. The screen blinked twice. Classification, living archive. Tag approved. Silence. Then the compliance officer, reluctant, gave a curt nod. "She's yours." Jalen didn't move until they did. He stood like stone as the team packed up, walking out without ceremony, leaving the quiet behind them like a wound that had just closed. Only when the door sealed did he look back at Ariasia. "You did it." She didn't answer, just took his hand, open now, trembling slightly, and placed the folded page into it. "For you," she said. He opened it. There was nothing on the paper. Not visibly, but when he held it to his chest, he felt it. A warmth, a rhythm, a memory not of the past, but of being remembered. He folded the page again, placed it inside his coat pocket, and looked at her. "You're not just a memory now." "No," she said. "I'm not." And in that moment, neither of them belonged to the vault anymore. They belonged to each other. They didn't leave in a hurry. There were no alarms, no explosions, no chase through icy corridors. When the inspection team cleared the vault and the hatch sealed behind them, the silence that followed wasn't tense, it was complete. Jalen stood by the door a long time, waiting for the weight in his chest to shift. It didn't. Not really. But Ariacia's hand found his again, and that was enough. Her fingers were warm against his palm. Steady. Real. He turned toward her. "It's time." She nodded. No fear in her eyes. Just a calm certainty. Like she'd known from the beginning that this wouldn't end in walls. They walked through the corridors of the Tarson Reclamation Vault one last time. Past forgotten files, failed projects, and bioforms sealed in stasis that would never be claimed. Ariacia paused once at a console that had long since gone dark and brushed her hand across its screen. "Do you want to leave a mark?" Jalen asked. She looked at him, her gaze unreadable, then pressed her thumb gently to the dust-covered surface. When she pulled it away, a single curved line remained. A farewell, not a warning, not a trace. Just presence. Together, they exited through the lower access gate. It wasn't locked. Nothing down here ever was. The outside was brutal, even at dawn. No one wanted to wander far from the warmth of artificial light. But Jalen had prepared. A sealed capsule hab waited at the edge of the crater line, just beyond the vault's sensor field. Officially marked as decommissioned. In truth, it was functional, repurposed, and stocked with everything they'd need to start again. He'd built it slowly, piece by piece, in case this day ever came. The wind outside didn't howl. There was no atmosphere for it. But the ice shifted beneath their boots, crunching in sharp, crystalline fractures. Their breath fogged inside their helmets as they crossed the frozen plain, hand in hand. When they reached the capsule, Jalen keyed in the access code. The doors hissed open, welcoming them with recycled warmth and the low hum of powered life. It was small, just one chamber, a sleeping alcove, a desk, a microgreen wall he'd barely kept alive. But to Ariacia, it was vast. She stepped inside and closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as though even the filtered air tasted new. He watched her run her fingers across the polymer walls, the bindings of the shelved books, the growing vines of the paper seed plants he'd tended since before she arrived. "This is yours," he said. She turned toward him. "No, this is ours." He didn't argue. Days passed slowly after that, and in weeks. There was no dramatic shift, no cinematic moment of transformation. Instead, they settled into small rhythms. Shared meals, quiet evenings, notes left on paper, words spoken without urgency, language returning like a tide that had forgotten how to rise. Ariacia wrote again, not in the notebook from the vault. She kept that sealed beneath her pillow, a sacred thing, but in new pages, rough and clean and waiting. Her writing wasn't linear. It moved in circles, patterns, etched shapes that carried memory more than meaning. But when she read them aloud, something happened. Jalen could feel the weight of her voice settle into the air like truth. "I'm building garden," she told him one morning. He glanced toward the microgreen wall. "You already are." "No," she said, walking to the desk where pages lay folded into careful peaks and valleys. "Not of plants. Of paper." He moved closer, frowning gently. She picked up a folded sheet and placed it in his hand. "If you plant a word in soil, nothing grows. But if you fold it, press it, hold it close, it becomes part of you, and part of someone else when they unfold it again. He nodded slowly. You're writing things meant to be opened. Yes, she said, but only when the world is ready. They spent hours like that, folding pages, writing names, not histories, not systems, just truths, quiet, aching, beautiful truths. Jalen kept working. He taught language preservation modules remotely, anonymously, under a pseudonym. But his best lessons weren't sent out to students. They were whispered into the night, to the woman who had once been a product, then a ghost, then a flame, and eventually simply his. One evening, he found her by the window, fingers resting on the ledge. The ice fields stretched wide beneath a dim, peach-hued sky. The moons of the larger planet drifted on the horizon. We're safe, he said. Ariatia didn't look at him. Yes, we don't have to run anymore. No. He stepped beside her. Then what do we do? She turned, placing his hand on her abdomen. We grow. His heart skipped, then thudded once, heavy and sure. She smiled softly. There was a protocol built into me, a reproductive lock. They never activated it, so it wasn't part of my purpose. And now, I choose. He leaned in, resting his forehead to hers the same way he had on the day she said his name. Do you want this? She nodded. Not because it proves anything, not to fulfill a function, but because I want someone to remember our names when we're gone. He kissed her, not in desperation, not even in joy, but in recognition. A quiet, reverent yes. Years later, no one at the Tarson Vault would remember their file codes. But somewhere on the edge of a forgotten moon, a small dwelling stood, full of paper folded into flowers, vines spelling silent promises across walls, and a child learning to speak their first words from two voices that had once lived in silence. Their garden was quiet, but spoke volumes, and every page that grew from its roots carried more than language. It carried love, real, chosen, unforgotten. The days that followed were not dramatic. No one came knocking. No alarm sounded. There were no transmissions flagged as urgent. No soldiers dispatched to reclaim what the system had discarded, which made Jalen nervous at first. He kept expecting the weight to return, the one he had carried through the halls of the tribunal, through the cold corridors of Tarson Vault. The weight of being watched, judged, waiting to be punished for choosing compassion. But it didn't come. Instead, mornings came with Ariatia's voice softly humming as she unfolded her paper garden, delicate symbols pressed into the edges of folded sheets. Afternoons came with silence, broken only by the soft brush of her fingers across the green wall, tending the curling vines like a form of meditation. And nights came with the sound of her breath beside his, steady and present. It wasn't peace at first. Not exactly. It was adjustment, the slow recalibration of two people learning how to live in a space not shaped by fear. Jalen found himself noticing small things. The way she tilted her head when listening, like she was translating the world itself. How she watched their growing seedlings not with the expectation of food, but as if waiting for them to speak. How she paused before every word, never rushing a thought, never assuming the first version of a sentence was the best one. She had been silenced for so long, every word now seemed sacred. And he listened, not just with attention, but with intention. One night, as he closed up the data logs he still submitted anonymously for extra credits, he noticed a new page resting on his desk. Folded, no signature, but unmistakably hers. He unfolded it. No ink, but pressed into the page, deep, rhythmic, layered, was a story. Not one he'd heard before. A memory. A woman with sea-green skin, kneeling in a field of thin grasses on a terraformed plateau. Another beside her, hand outstretched, both of them watching as a third figure. A child, perhaps, spoke a single word neither of them understood, and yet wept upon hearing it spoken aloud. Jalen stared at the page for a long time. "Where is this from?" he asked that evening, setting the folded memory gently between them. Ariatia touched it with two fingers. "My first owner." He looked at her, startled. "You remember?" She nodded. Not the training, not the resets, but moments, hidden under the surface. A word spoken without punishment. A pause before deletion. He swallowed. Was that child real? I don't know, she said, but it felt true. He studied her face. Do you dream of them? No, she said. I become them in the dream. He reached out, covering her hand. You're not their echo. You're yourself. I am, she whispered. Now. The next morning, she asked for scissors. Why? He asked, puzzled. She smiled, a small mischievous tilt of the lips. I want to teach. He watched as she cut the old ration wrappers into thin strips. Then the plant labels. Then recycled printouts of blank report templates. Each was folded, bent, transformed into shapes that began as origami, but became something else entirely. Instructional. She made a spiral that unfolded into a grammar tree, a three-dimensional syntax chain, a poem cube that rotated meaning depending on how it was held. Jalen couldn't look away. You're building a language, he said. Ariacia's eyes sparkled. No, we're building one. That afternoon, they sat together and invented words. A sharp-cornered fold for warmth remembered after pain. A nested spiral for thought that blooms only in silence. A triangular peak with an open center for trust earned through stillness. No one else would understand these, but they did. And that was enough. Weeks passed. Then one morning, a signal light blinked on the far wall. Not a warning, not a surveillance ping, just a message. Jalen approached it cautiously, systems locked behind multiple offline firewalls. He decoded the pulse manually, breath slow. It was from a language preservation network. Private, dispersed, anonymous, a request, not for a name, not for a product, but for a story. He didn't reply at first. He turned to Ariacia, holding the blinking message between them. It's your choice, he said. She stepped forward, touched the edge of the screen, and closed the message without hesitation. Later, she said, when I'm ready. And he nodded. Later that evening, they sat beneath the thermal canopy outside the capsule, wrapped in blankets against the vacuum-sealed cold. The moon's ice stretched flat in all directions, smooth and glittering like crushed stars. Above them, the gas giant hung like a broken halo, slow and massive in the sky. Jalen handed her a warm cup. She took it, fingers brushing his, and asked the question she'd never asked before. What would you have done if I never spoke? He looked at her for a long moment, surprised by the weight of it. I would have stayed. Why? Because silence isn't absence. Not when you're near. She smiled. I wasn't waiting to be saved, she said. I was waiting to be seen. And now, I see you two. He leaned closer, breath warming the air between them. They didn't kiss right away. They didn't need to. When their lips did meet, finally, it wasn't explosive or urgent. It was quiet. A seal. A soft, human answer to every mechanical question that had once tried to reduce them to functions. Later that night, Jalen wrote one final note in his old archive logs. She speaks in folds now, in breath and silence, in warmth carried through fingers, in symbols made not to impress, but to remain. I am no longer the translator. I am the one who listens. And she, once returned, now remembered, writes in a language the universe will never fully understand, because it wasn't meant to be understood, only felt. When he closed the log, he did not encrypt it. He left it open. In the morning, they planted their first message outside the capsule, beneath a cairn of folded stones. No receiver, no data trace, just a folded page. It read, in shapes only two people could understand. We were here, we lived, and we loved in our own language. And somewhere, deep in the silent blue of that cold moon sunrise, the windless world carried their meaning forward. Untranslated, but not unread.